I ask you to consider, is it time for you to get on with something? What's it time for you to get on with in your life? Because moments occur. Those signal moments when it is as though something deep emerges that says it's time. It's time for next steps. It's time to lean in to my greater yet to be. If it's not now for you, it will be at some point. And it's so powerful to heed that. Last week we talked about trusting the yes of your soul, or yes meaning your ever-expanding spirit. Trusting that ever-expanding spirit in you. And then looking at creating a more dynamic and genuine trusting as the spiritual foundation for our life. A genuine trusting. I'm reminded of the story of a guy who goes into a bar and he orders 2 beers, but he's alone. The bartender thought that was a little curious. And he started sipping from one beer, and then he'd sip from the other, and he'd sip from one, and he'd sip from the other. And finally, the bartender just couldn't control his curiosity. He went and he said, you know, I could serve you this 1 beer, and then when you're done, I could bring you a fresh, cold one, rather than you sipping from 2. And the guy said, oh, no, you don't understand. This is a ritual of mine. My brother and I are extremely close, but he lives far away. But we have this ritual, is that when we go out to relax like this, we each order 2 beers, and I'll sip mine, and then I'll sip his as though he's here with me. And I feel so close to him, and he does that too where he is. So I sip mine, and he sips his. And the bar said, well, that's really a beautiful ritual, wonderful. And so in many recurring visits, that happens, the 2 beers and everything. But then one time, the guy goes into the bar, and he says, I'd like 1 beer. The bartender serves it, but then he goes on about his business, very concerned. What's happened to the brother? Oh my goodness, I hope he hasn't died. And finally his concern gets the best of him. He says, I'm so sorry, but I know something's happened to your brother, and I'm very, very concerned about him. Is he okay? And he said, oh, my brother is fine. It's just I decided to give up drinking. Now, you see, when it's time to get on with it, you got to not get into self-deception. It's got to be full out and genuine, a genuine trusting. See, most people struggle to get on with it when it's time, unless you're different than me. We struggle, and we cling to what is, to the status quo, and then also we sabotage the whole process by demanding to know more than we can know, demanding for guarantees, demanding to have assurances along the path. And yet most of the great steps we've ever taken in our life, we didn't know. There were no assurances, there was no advanced directives of what was happening or where we were heading. We just went. And such is the nature of this kind of thing. I'm reminded of Ernest Shackleton, who he wanted to lead an expedition to Antarctica in 1914. And he put this ad in the paper, which is similar to the kinds of invitations life gives us when it's time to get on with it. Men wanted for hazardous journey, small wages, bitter cold, long months of complete darkness, constant danger, safe return doubtful, honor and recognition in case of success. He got 28 crew from that ad, and they went on and they did the expedition. That's a longer story I won't go into. And not one life was lost. But you know, there are times when we have to recognize we're all on a hero's journey, so much bigger than the life we're living. We're on a hero's journey, and there will come that time when we're invited to step into the unknown and to move deliberately and courageously into what is to be more for us, or what we call our greater yet to be. And might we say yes? I want to talk a little bit about goals and plans. Now, there's a place for goals and plans, especially as we're building up our lives and advancing things in our lives. It's good to set goals. It's good to have plans. And yet there's also a time for dispensing with them and being out of control in our life. Very much so. You see, goals and plans are made by virtue of what we understand now and where we are now. And our goals and plans are all about the arena of life we're living in now. But then the question is, what vaults us into a bigger arena of livingness? I'll tell you, that happens only when we let go of control. And we allow ourselves to move out into bold discovery, moving courageously into the creative unknown in this life. That's what creates a bigger space. And I have a sense that in these times, a whole lot of us are involved in this. A whole lot of us. Now, that then brings us to the topic of the day, wandering into mastery. It's about a bold and intentional kind of wandering. It's not haphazard or careless or purposeless. I'm talking about the kind of wandering that is soul-impelled. You wander because you've dispensed with your plans so that you can be shown something even greater. And so the wandering I'm talking about is the times when we decide to go ahead and let change have its way. And we move forward deliberately, not with a hopelessness, but with a clear sense that we're learning and discovering. We're pioneers into the possible. And it's all about being willing to let go and wander and let the map write itself as we go. Now, really what I want to focus on today are ways to wander masterfully. Ways we can do this. So here are some of them. First of all, if you're impelled into wandering, meaning a journey without a map, then wander in wholeness. Wander with a sense that you are whole now, not when you reach some destination, but you're whole now, you're full now. You're not needy, frantically searching for something else, which is really just recreating something new in the current arena. No, you're wandering into something new territory, truly pioneering in your life. See, the mind-made self, the self that the mind has made, which is a fabricated self-image, it thinks that life is all about certainties and that life is about accomplishments and possessions and keeping change at bay. That's the mind-made self. But when I talk about wandering in wholeness, it's going deeper than that constructed self, to the true being of you and me, to the true self, the natural self, the God self within us, plumbing into that. And as we connect with the God self, not the mind-made self, the God self, we ask a couple of powerful questions. What does God want to become in and as me? What does God want to become? And then, secondarily, what does God want to create in and through me? That's wandering, but in a sense of wholeness. You don't wander like you're bereft. You wander with a sense that I'm whole and something is unfolding by means of me, by means of my spiritual connection. Now, last week, I talked about Moses and how Moses was told to lead the children of Israel out of Egypt and how he did that. And at one point, they were thirsting, and God told Moses to take his staff and hit it upon the rock at Horeb, and he did so, and the waters flowed forth, and they drank of the waters. That's part one of that story, and it really is a powerful metaphor, Moses being symbolic of the one who draws forth. And that there's a Moses in you and me, in every one of us, the capacity to draw forth the good that we seek. Now, the rock symbolizes the dry and the hard places. The dry and the hard places in life, in ourselves, in others. And yet the message in all of this is that even the rocks contain God. God is in everything and in everyone and in every situation, but it awaits the tap of that staff, which last week we declared symbolizes absolute trusting. The staff of deeper, absolute, genuine trusting. And so when we come upon the hard times in life or a hardened heart or whatever the case, we tap it with that trusting, and the waters of the divine, the givingness, the intelligence, the good of God flows forth. There's no spot where God is not. And to have that vision as we go into the world. But there's a part two to that story. So they wander some more, Moses and the children of Israel, and they get thirsty again. So Moses consults God, and God says, this time, just speak and call forth the water from the rock. Well, Moses goes over to the rock and thinks better of it, and he just takes his staff again and taps the rock, and again, the waters flow. But God is displeased because Moses didn't follow the instructions. And so God says, Moses, you didn't do what I told you to do, so here's the deal. You're not going to lead the children of Israel into the promised land. You're not going to be the one. It'll be the one coming after you, which would be Joshua. Now, you might think that's kind of strict, but there's a meaning in this. The whole Bible is symbolic in that regard. The meaning of this is that Moses was using the staff of trust, yes. But God, the all-intelligent love of this universe, wanted Moses to take the next step. And not just apply his trusting, but he wanted him to assume his place as a spiritual being, as a channel for God. And he wanted him to just speak it as God would speak it, as God said, let there be, and there was. He wanted him to speak it and thus actualize his spiritual essence to a greater degree. So now this has a lot to say to all of us who are students of this pathway. And by the way, again, this pathway is deep and rich, and to continue its study in the courses, as well as the practices in meditation and prayer is essential. But really, what this is about, students who get into the teaching initially learn that if they can shift their believing significantly, that brings about, through something we call the law, or the law of mind, a corresponding shift and enhancement of their life in one or all areas of their lives. For as within, so without. It is done unto us as we believe. And that's a good way to start. It's a very good way to start. And yet, here's the deal. It's not the end game. The end game is not about just working the law for manifesting what we need, although all that we need is already given. But the end game is not manifesting more, it's becoming more. It's revealing more and more of our spiritual nature and healing the sense of separation even more so that we live in a sense of realized oneness. And we speak the word of the divine, we speak the truth as our word of power. That's what the divine was trying to get Moses to do. Yeah, you used your faith and you believed in the water and it was here. Now speak it as a child of God, as an expression of God. Speak it and actualize that. And by the power of your spiritual authority, it shall be as you, the God self, ordains. And that's what we're called to do, is to step into a higher degree of life expression. It begins with believing, it begins with trusting, but then it becomes a higher actualization of our spiritual light and potential. Very powerful step. This is when I say wander in wholeness, it's wandering in a state of you as a spiritual being, remembering that simply because things are in flux doesn't mean that you're anything less than God made you to be. You're an expression of God, a light of God, an instrument of the divine, and that shall always be. So you wander with that deep confidence within, and you become an emissary of the Spirit wherever you go, drawing forth the light and the good of God. Now in our youth church, we teach this. And by the way, we have one of the finest youth and family ministries anywhere here. And I tell you what, thank you to Dr. Barry, thank you to Stacy Butters, Saul Fluel, Reverend Nadine Cox, Reverend Michelle Scavetta, and all of their teams. They have crafted over the years one of the most finest ministries. If you've got young people, get them into it. Because they'll learn how to think, they'll learn how to weather storms, they'll deal with pressures better, they'll know who they are and be able to love themselves even when things are challenging. It's the best thing ever. And they'll be more inclusive. They're creating an enlightened citizenry for our world, and it's a beautiful thing. Oh, and by the way, let me digress even further here. Some of you who've been around a while will remember how excited I was when I had my first grandchild coming to me, and her little Daisy. And if you were back then, I held her up as an infant. Well, that little grandchild turns 16 today. I don't understand what happened. Nothing's changed with me. So get involved in the youth ministry. They're involved. Daisy and her sister and her brother are involved in the youth choir and everything. It's just a phenomenal thing. Why did I go down this road? Oh, all right. So in the youth classes, they teach them an acronym, because that's a part of our tradition here, about a frog. A frog. And FROG stands for fully relying on God. And they teach them about that, which is so sacred and so beautiful. Fully relying on God. And they've even written songs about it that they sing in youth church. I think it's fantastic. And to start as a frog, we want to continue our journey. And we want to become an eagle. Not just relying on God, but an eagle stands for expressing as God's living enterprise. Expressing as God's living enterprise. That's the step that Moses was invited to, but he wasn't ready. He didn't discern it. And that's the step we're always invited to, especially as we take the biggest risks of our lives, is to remember that we're here expressing, not only relying on God, but we're expressing as God's living enterprise. A wonderful metaphysician of old, Eric Butterworth, he wrote, "Remember, consciousness is the key. Your true business is the express business, the business of releasing your imprisoned splendor. Nothing can impede the flow of affluence or success to the one who keeps themselves in tune with the infinite. Remember to affirm, I am God's living enterprise, and God cannot fail." I am God's living enterprise, and God cannot, say that with me. I am God's living enterprise, and God cannot fail, and thus neither can you. So when you wander without a map, wander in a sense of wholeness, expressing as God's living enterprise. Secondly, as you wander, wander in surrender, because you know that you're a part of being birthed into the greater. It's about surrendering the lesser design. The design that has served you well, perhaps, in your life, but something more is beckoning. To surrender. Now, there's so much confusion around surrender. I wrote a whole chapter in my book about it called This Journey is Surrender. And this is what it comes down to. Purposeful surrendering, rather than giving up, it's flowing with and opening into. It is attuning to the wisdom and possibilities that are being obstructed by resistance and forcing. It is higher level allowing something better to emerge, allowing higher energies to work through us and to use us. Ultimately, it is an absolute faith that something greater and more wonderful than we realize is available to flow into our experience if we're willing to welcome it skillfully and let it be. Let it be. Wander with that kind of surrender. Like a guy named Michael Singer. In his 30s, back in the 1970s, he decided to dedicate his life to a conscious surrendering and to not resist change and to flow with the changes and accept and not resist. And that led him on an incredible journey throughout his life up to now. He became a spiritual teacher. Then he was guided to form a vibrant spiritual community. Then he got into designing buildings. Then he got into software engineering and created a $300 million business in doing that. And then he wrote a landmark book called The Untethered Soul that has been translated into 30 languages, and another called The Surrender Experiment. And he just continues to greet with surrendered acceptance the changes and opportunities life brings to him. A surrendered kind of life. And he says the spiritual journey is one of constant transformation. In order to grow, you must give up the struggle to remain the same and learn to embrace change at all times. Wander with wholeness, a sense of your wholeness, and wander in that surrendered, welcoming space. And then, thirdly, wander in love. The heart, an opened heart, is essential on any journey, but most especially when we move without a map. The surrendered heart, the open heart, it's essential. And I've had plenty of an opportunity in these awkward times of adjustment for me to just have to remind myself to love myself and to remember that love is the most beautiful thing anyway, no matter where I'm led. And it's so important. Do you love yourself even when you don't know what's going on? Do you love yourself when it seems like your plans have been scrunched up and tossed away, and you're realizing, oh, there's a new plan, and I don't know what it is yet? Can you still be on your own team? Or do the old voices of make wrong and put down come in? Love them away and return to self-compassion. I've always been moved by the story of a Frenchman named Jacques Lucéran. Jacques, when he was a boy, at age 8, went blind, totally lost his sight, and it terrified him. He was frightened, finding his way among walls and doors and people and trees, and it was a terrible time for him as he adjusted. But then he made some discoveries that were immense for him. He said, though I couldn't see the light of the world outside, the light was still within me. And as long as I paid attention to the light within, I rarely had problems getting around. I also discovered that there was only one way to see this inner light, and that was through love. So that love is a light within us that can guide our way. And Lucéran says that whenever he got envious or sad or angry or hateful, the light was out and he truly was blind. He truly felt blind. And he realized his blindness was not so much a loss of a vision, but he was blind when he lost a sense of love in his life. Well, he grew on that foundation, and when he was a young man, he successfully formed, he became a brilliant student, by the way, and he had a very keen, adept way of reading people's souls. And then he began an underground youth resistance movement there in France during World War II that drew about 600 other young people, and all this going on. Later, he was captured by the Nazis and sent to Buchenwald, the concentration camp. And he was one of only 30 people who were still alive when the United States freed that camp in April of 1945. Now, here's a picture of him in his later years, Lucéran. And so he married, and he immigrated here to the United States in the 50s, and then he taught literature at Western Reserve University. As we wander, don't be blind. You can see if your heart is open, and you'll know what steps to take. Oh, don't leave home without that love. Wander with an open heart in love. And finally, wander in awe. Wander in awe, because no matter how unsettled things get when the ripples of change and transformation show up in our lives, life is still a miracle. Isn't it amazing? Sometimes we get so self-absorbed, so caught up in our own stuff, that we forget to realize we're living in this incredible miracle on this blue-green planet out here, and all the glory of Grandmother Earth and the people and the opportunities and the creative minds, ourselves as spiritual beings. It's absolutely amazing. And it's awesome. Walk in awe, amazement with everything. A study was done by a psychologist, a 3-year study, because he was noticing that people who could reconnect with their awe had healings. And the things that they found out was, first of all, awe binds us together. It helps us see things in new ways, and that's so important when we're wandering. It makes us nicer and happier, and it even heals our bodies. Wander with a sense of the awe of it all, even the awe of your unknowing and what's forming itself in and through you. The great Sufi poet, Rumi, he said, "You wander from place to place. You hunt for a necklace of diamonds. It is already around your neck." So knowing that you already have it, when it's time to get on with it, I invite you to trust your yes, fully relying on God. And beyond that, to wander into mastery, expressing as God's living enterprise. Yeah, wander in wholeness, in love, in surrender, and in awe. And in so doing, you will be placing yourself in the hands of the divine. And I know that you will then be set down in the amazing land of your greater yet to be.